Celebratory fire is another problem. All weddings are celebrated by hundreds of rounds being ripped off from AK-47s. That's a bit unnerving at night as well. So it's an entirely different culture, and one that is permeated with weapons. When I got there, you could buy an AK-47 on the street for less than $100, but interestingly, 9mm rounds went $1 a piece. Big market for 9mm ammunition. This is a typical movement through downtown major arterial in Baghdad. In Arabic, it basically says, stay back 100 meters or we will kill you. Pretty plain spoken language, but this is how we had to operate. And in general, our concept of operations was this. And the Iraqi drivers learned this over time, that they were not to come close to convoys as they moved through the city or through the country for that matter. And if they stood back at a safe distance and did not encroach on us, everything would be fine. And let me tell you, when I just say kind of casually that they learned to do this, there were only 1 million licensed drivers in the country when we got there. That's because Saddam had imposed a moratorium and said there could be 1 million, but not a million and one. Now that 1,001st person in line at the DMV office, I'm sure, was extremely aggrieved about that. But nevertheless, there were 1 million drivers. Once Saddam was deposed, everybody drove, whether they had a license or not, which reminded me a great deal of Memphis. And they found every possible carcass of an automobile that was left in a junkyard, or they could steal from Kuwait or someplace else and bring it in and make it run. So this is a country that in its urban centers is tremendously congested, which is funny and ironic, except that it creates an enormous issue in terms of security, and I'll talk about that in a minute. As you get out amongst the Iraqi police, and there are about 1,200 Iraqi police facilities in the country, 1,200, and a force now of about 200,000 members. They all have detention facilities, and in these detention facilities, there's no segregation as we are accustomed to do. The notion of sight and sound separation is a bit foreign in Iraq. And so you end up with conglomerations of prisoners, with terrorists, with civil offenders, and criminal offenders. And one of the things that we did was go to detention facilities to sort out whether the right people were being held for the right reasons. Why would that be difficult? Because there are some fundamental differences in the canonized law in Iraq. And I'll give you just a quick couple of glaring examples. For instance, the most persuasive kind of evidence in a successful prosecution in Iraq is not physical evidence, it's not eyewitness testimony, and there is no CSI Baghdad. It is the power of the confession. And that is canonized in Iraqi and generally in Muslim law. And it says that somebody responsible for committing a criminal act must confess to that act. So prosecutors rely heavily on a confession. So they turn to the police and they say, we need a confession. What do you think the police do? They're going to get a confession. So it's a bit disingenuous, I think, to say that we turned up, we were amazed and horrified that torture went on. Torture in the pursuit of justice is part of the embedded fabric of Iraqi law. And that's the kind of thing we tried to sort out as we went to detention facilities and tried to rework that within the extent that the culture will allow us to do so. The other thing that was extremely interesting to me, for those of you homicide investigators, you may have thought about this at one time or another. In Iraq, if one person takes the life of another and they decide to resolve it by what they call Sharia or tribal law, they sit the victim party and the suspect party down before a prominent Iraqi leader. And the Iraqi leader says, all right, the value of this life that was lost was $10,000. And they turn to the perpetrator's family and they say, are you prepared to pay $10,000? If the perpetrator's family agrees to do that, and that exchange of money takes place, and there's a good faith closure to that argument, that bond and that agreement, that case is set aside, never to be pursued again. It is the blood money contract that exists in many countries in the Middle East. If the perpetrator's family balks and will not pay that amount of money, that tribal leader then authorizes the victim's family to take the life of somebody in the perpetrator's family, which makes for a chain of homicides. So a very, very different set of circumstances. Next, please. Next. 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 Every so often in everybody's story in Iraq, there are bright lights. and I want to share this one with you. I had an opportunity to go one day to the medical district of Baghdad, which is where the hospitals were, not places you or I would necessarily want to be treated, but nevertheless, in the context of Iraq, it was the medical district. And we went to the medical district police facility, and I encountered a uniformed policewoman, and I use that term not historically incorrect, the fact that that's the distinction they make there, policemen, policewomen. Policewomen normally are not in uniform. 1, they are always Muslim. 2, their faces are normally hidden. 3, and 4, they never come up to a Westerner. Well, all that was set aside. We went and visited, spent about an hour and a half. I encountered this young lady who spoke English, much to the chagrin of her supervisors who did not. We had grand conversations about the United States, said goodbye, went on our way, felt like we had done a good deed in the interest of foreign policy. We're getting ready to pull out, and this young lady comes up and knocks on the window of the Suburban that I'm in. So we stop the convoy, open the door, and she says, "Would you get out, please? I'd like to have my picture taken with you." Well, she said it plainly enough in English that I thought I understood what she had said, but I asked my interpreter, please confirm this for me, because the notion of a Muslim woman with a Western Christian male just was not in our rules of engagement. And she confirmed she wanted to have her picture taken. So we got together, and I figured at the very least what would happen is we'd be separated by 3 or 4 feet, whatever the framing of the photograph allowed, and there'd be all this modesty displayed. No way, Jose. She sidled up to me, slammed her hip into me, wrapped her arm around me, and we had a series of photographs taken. Next slide. She asked me at the end of this, as we got to this point in the photograph series, hold your hand up like this and make a V for victory, which obviously I was prepared to do. What she said to me as this photograph was taken was this: tell the people of the United States of America from the people of Iraq, we thank them for being here. Now that in the midst of a war-torn country where cultures are overturned and we really had no sense particularly of whether we were doing things right or doing them wrong. This is one of those kind of fine, rare moments of inspiration that lifted you up. Next one, please. Can you stop it just for 1 second? Just watch, and I'll explain what you see. Pretty typical morning in Baghdad. This is one of our patrols moving from the red zone to the green zone. The driver of that vehicle you were just in was actually a female police officer from Duke University in North Carolina. They were moving a principal and some folks from one location to another. Unbeknownst to them, there was a double car bomb attack on an adjacent Iraqi police station. That's what you saw. And this is the whole question of you never know what's going to happen, where or when or how, and with what scope and with what scale. And then what happens in the aftermath of the chaos. So when these explosions went off, these officers had to find safe haven. They went to the green zone. The background noise you heard was 50 caliber machine guns, because as soon as the explosions went off, the Iraqi security forces began firing 50 caliber machine guns everywhere. For what reason, I haven't the faintest damn idea, but that's what they do.